Welcome back to Advancing with Watercolor, everyone. My name's Gary Tucker. I'll be your host today. We're going to be doing a watercolor in the studio, but it really started some years ago when I took a group of artists to visit the southern region of France, specifically the Dordogne Valley. Here we traveled through some of the villages, and one day we ended up painting along the village wall at the village of Domme. It's a very small village, but had this panoramic view of the Dordogne Valley. I wanted to recreate the sort of sensation that we experienced when we were looking out in the valley, but do it in the studio where I could share it with you. So let's see how this is done as we step into the Dordogne Valley in southern France. So the same basic ideas apply. Let's see how we put this together. What I look for are some of the singular shapes, the bigger shapes that we find on the valley floor. So the main one is the river that's transversing the scene, exiting the scene about here, winding up and taking us to the back of the painting. So this is just what we want, just what we need to kind of portray the Dordogne River. And this angle also tells us a lot about the perspective. It's rising in the picture plane. That gives us the impression that we're looking down on our subject. We're looking down from a great height. And the reason this is communicated is because we're standing about here. Our eye level is almost on the mountain range back here, pretty much on these mountains. Somewhere back here is our eye level. Everything below our eye level is going to be ascending in the picture plane. So naturally the river is going to be moving in this direction. And it's kind of our first observation, our first major observation. When we look at our picture, we see this rising river plane. We see it meandering also towards the back, getting thinner, making some turns, and then disappearing. This is just perfect for what we want to portray. And so we place these lines to establish that shape of the river wandering through the Dordogne Valley. And okay, so we've got that. We've placed that. We have an angled line here, which is basically a road. And we have another one just where the bridge crosses. Also at an angle, slightly rising. This is great. I mean, horizontal lines would be a little static in this case. So that angled line is to my liking. And I'm building that bridge. This is my focal area in the painting. And I think many of you have heard me talk about this at length. What is the focal area? Why do we think about that? How is it helpful? Why is it important? All good questions. And think about it maybe like we're familiar with grammar and a language. And grammar has verbs, pronouns. A noun has a subject. And the subject is sort of at the root of what we're trying to say in the language. So this is very much, I think, similar to what a center of interest is, a focal point. we need that to communicate, whether we're communicating visually, whether we're communicating in music, anything, dance, having sort of a center of interest or a major movement or a refrain or a subject gives us, well, helps us communicate with our audience. And for us as visual artists, it's helpful because it gives us a reference. So the scale is important in this bridge. How big is it? The reflection, we see the reflection below. It gives us a feeling of how big the river is. Other things do that as well, but the bridge helps us there. It's sort of a man-made structure against all of this nature. It's a bright element against the midtones. It helps to orient us. And so we use that to kind of build our composition, to start our structure. And I'm going to be placing some major lines in proximity to the bridge. So for example, those trees, smaller trees, near the bridge. The bridge narrows here, kind of a big tree coming in front of it. I like that. I'll look for other visual clues. So more trees back here, smaller of course. We start to see farmlands, and that's indicated by these rows of crops or roads that are flanked by trees. Are we going to draw all of these? No. It would be too much. We'd spend all day just making our drawing. But let's do the major ones. And in fact, leaving some of this unfinished in the drawing is actually to our benefit. When we're in the field, it's the same idea. We try to see the major lines, the major shapes, and by major I mean the larger shapes. The shape of this whole plain, or this plain, or the plains back here of the sloping mountains. These are shapes, first of all, and seeing them as shapes is instrumental in bringing accuracy to your drawing, bringing accuracy then to your painting. Do we see any structures, any other structures other than bridge? It's really hard to see. We see a small house here and there. I think that could be useful. Let's give it the proper size. It's not going to be anything bigger than that. Kind of flanked by some darker trees. That's another indication of scale. And scale for this image in particular is very important because we're looking over a vast space, aren't we? We're seeing a vast space, and we need that to be communicated. We want that scale to be felt. Some more fields. Looks like a little orchard down here. So this is the Dordogne Valley, which has been cultivated for centuries. Basically under French rule at one time, under English rule. It's been you can find castles from both cultures lining the banks of the Dordogne. So it's a very interesting area. And this place in particular, where we're standing, is a city called Domme. and you reach it by a long winding road, narrow road that takes you to the village of Domme. And at the edge of the village, you see this fence that is flanking this beautiful vista. So it's a major stop for anyone who's traveling in the area. I think we've done enough drawing. The major lines are indicated. We've got some divisions suggested. The trees, the bridge, the shape of the river, our up and down view on the horizon. So let's go ahead and set out our palette and start to create this painting. Palette's pretty clean, ready to go. I'm going to start by mixing up a little of the green that I want to use. This is my cadmium yellow. It's a very strong color. I'm going to add quite a bit of water to it. This is the green, the sap green I was talking about. Sap green has also quite a bit of yellow already added. I see it mostly as a shortcut. And, well, kind of a very smoky, humid feeling today. So I'm going to start with water back here. Clean that out of my brush. Just start with water. And we're going right over the mountains, and we start to hit the valley floor, a plane change right about here. So I'm going to start to introduce the green. And I'm going to be adding some of my cobalt blue to this green. I'll be starting with a little bluer green and working it towards a yellowish green. Trying to create some of that feeling of distance. Okay. And as I go, I am going to be keeping some little breaks, little skips, little pieces of white. I think we can put a bit more yellow with that. The yellow will definitely start to increase as we move lower into the painting. Where am I leaving these whites? I'm leaving them for roads, or in the case of this house, start to make it a little thicker. Means with a little more yellow. I do want to avoid the river as well. Which meanders towards the back here. Yeah, I'm just going to stay on this side for the moment, since the river's now kind of dividing the painting. Adding a bit more sap green and yellow to the mix. Right over everything. Let's add a little more of that green. to the mixture, a little more yellow. Create the deeper green through here. I'm going to start to add a little bit of burnt sienna. Hi everyone, I'm Gary Tucker. This demo is part of a larger project on brushwork, available now for $10 on my storefront at gumroad.com/Gary Tucker Artist. You can help support my work on YouTube by purchasing my videos on watercolor painting and drawing. This helps me to continue to bring free content to my YouTube channel. Thanks for watching. I like that. I think I can add just a touch more yellow, a little more burnt sienna, a touch more green. Come through here. Well, we can see that graded wash, can't we? How that's creating a feeling of depth. Okay, let's come down now to the left side. I'm going to add some water and a little bit of blue to this green. Thank goodness the water runs downhill. Just a little more blue to get started anyway. Back here. There we go. And we'll start to build in the shape of the river. In the tonal study, I created the shape of the water first, of the river, if you remember. And it can go either way, truly. Usually it makes sense to paint that light value first. Oops, that was a lot of yellow. It's okay, let's use it. We've got a lot of water on the paper, so no problem. And bring, in fact, a lot of yellow to this side here. Before it has a chance to dry. Just sun dry brush like that. I'd like more of a melting effect up on the top there. Okay, and more yellow, a little more green. A little brown, loosely mixed. Let's do that. So you see already we're getting some variations in the green, blue to yellow to red, all in the green. Tonally, they're very similar. The light and dark quality is very similar, but the color is changing subtly. A little more yellow through here. And we'll leave some whites too. Put a little more, excuse me, I think this is okay. This is our foundation. We're going to certainly add to this. But the shape of the river is captured. We've left some bits of white here and there. While it's a little wet, yes, we can do a couple things. Say we want to create a little darker tree, and I can do some of that around the bridge, I think. So I'm switching to a smaller brush, smaller sablette brush, and I'll take out a lot of the paint before there we go, something like this. Mix it into this wet area. Get a little darker tree to start with. Maybe some of that into here as well. And I'm not painting these trees necessarily in shade, just giving a little darker green along the water's edge, specifically near the bridge, my focal point. I am keen on capturing that focal point, as you are no doubt learning. Couple smaller trees, just a few stronger darks while the paint is wet so that we get some bleeding. Kind of controlled bleeding. These marks are sort of just indicating the tops of trees or a little bit of shadow in the trees. And the angle is meant to kind of create this slope, a slope down to the river. Already it's quite pleasing because of this soft transition. We feel the white of the paper actually has some atmosphere. We're going to paint some blue there in the second stage, but for now I'm just putting some little darker greens along this white road, signify distant trees, faint trees. And kind of waiting for the paint to dry a little bit. There, so now we get a little clearer sensation of how the river turns back there. I like that very much in this painting. I have a large area of white here. I'm going to refine that just a little, make it just a small square that will turn into a house at some point. Yeah, that's about how big it is, isn't it? All right, let's paint. Let's let this section dry. Let's paint the water. Water is going to be primarily blue, reflecting the sky and the clouds overhead. We can drop in some reflections while it's wet. We can do it now. We can also wait to do that until we have stronger sense of the trees along the side. I think I'm going to try and do some of that now. I've got cobalt here, which I'm going to use, I used in the background a little bit. I'm going to use that more in the next stage. Cobalt and a little bit of burnt sienna to gray that cobalt. These two colors work well together. However, the sienna is can really overtake the cobalt, so you have to be careful. Don't worry about getting the exact same color that I am. It's not, try for the exact same value, light and dark. So I'm going to use the white back here. I'm going to simply start with water and come along this edge, and I'm going to leave some whites. Won't bring it right to the edge, but pretty close. Let's stop at the bridge for our first pause. And into that, yes, let's add a little bit of this blue while it's wet. Maybe through here. So this is a good example of compartmentalization. A little darker. Meaning that we break our painting progress at certain intervals that are manageable. Like that. And I'm going to experiment by taking some darker color, a little smaller brush and some darker color, a darker green, I think, using some of this green and blue, a little bit of brown. Anyway, you know, we have some trees that kind of line the side here. And I want to create some reflections while I can. You notice how the reflection color just dissolves when I put it into the water's edge. A little more. Like that. And this is to sort of get a feel for what I can expect in other stages. Like that. Good. Let's do this lower part of the water. Starting with just clean water, a big brush. Right under the bridge. And I'm going to try to avoid the bridge itself. In other words, the bridge is going to remain white. Just water. To kind of wet this area. Then we switch to a smaller brush and a little bit of that cobalt blue. A little stronger now. This is where we're kind of creating our gradient. I'm going to bring it right under. Here I'm following the drawing pretty much. Probably could be better, but it's okay for now. And we capture the bridge. And it's still very wet, so this is good. Let's Carry some of that over here. Bring in a little, oops, not the green, but more of a kind of grayed blue. Just a little bit of a cloud feeling, underside of a cloud. Like that. So we have a nice, simple shape of the white bridge. We're certainly going to add to that in the future, but let's continue our work down. Some more blue sky through here. Maybe a passing cloud. We'll leave that kind of white. This we should bring, since this edge is now dry, I feel comfortable to bring the water's edge right up to the edge of the green that we painted earlier. Okay. And I'm going to introduce just one little extra blue here. I see it in the image and I like it. And let that dissolve. Nice little shock of color. We can echo that to other places. I'm doing it down below. Anyway, all soft edges for the most part, right? That's what we want. And let's add some, some of those shadows, reflections. You notice that the green on the right bank is very bright, the foliage in the fields, but that the shadow color is quite dark. I'm going to use a lot of blue, a little bit of brown, more. Color's pretty thick here, isn't it? And we'll start here where we have the larger shadows, just along the edge. These trees are tall, so they're going to be casting longer shadows. Where else can we do that? We have a vertical tree. Maybe right here. Some more shadows from trees. And a large mass of trees here. Creating a nice definition, a very natural definition for the edge of the water. A little more blue. Burnt sienna. You can put some green in there too if you like. So taper that edge. Some places the shadow let it flow down. Some places very skinny. Usually it's descriptive of the trees that line the edge. On this side we don't have so much, do we? But we need something. Let's put just some touches to remind us that we need something. Most of the reflections that we see are on the right side, which makes sense because the reflections always come toward us. So we're not going to see many reflections on this side, more the edges of trees, which we come to next. Okay, so the valley floor is starting to come alive based on shapes, based on some of the lines that traverse. We're creating depth through this soft edge, and we've set up that bright green, now ready to add some darker greens to it, the mountains in the distance. Okay, let's pause here. Back and dry for the most part. Let's start again. We're going to start in the back, start to create that blue haze with some mountains rising out of the haze. Let's start again with just the palest of blues. Means a little bit of cobalt, a lot of water. Back here. Very, very pale. And we'll bring it right down to that first plane. Right through here. Okay, and let's create the mountains now using a little bit of green, but mostly a bluish green. A little bit of green mixed with more cobalt. That's going to give us the sort of haze. We want to get some soft edges back here. Soft edges towards that distant slope. So I'm painting into the wet area, creating a mountain, just letting the color drift down. And I'll do the same on the left side. A little more green, perhaps. Create a slope coming in from the left side. Like this. And this is where basically I'm saying the mountains kind of reach the valley, those distant mountains. And along this ridge, I'm going to put some darker trees. So back to that green, but more blue, small brush now, and a little thicker color. So for example, I need an even smaller brush, I think. There we go. Let's add some green, and we'll just kind of loosely paint some trees back here. And we'll start to bring these trees out onto the plain like this. See how we create interlocking edges with our shapes. And then we're going to just continue to carry this down in the form of some trees. I'll show you what I mean. Cobalt blue, that same sap green, perhaps a bit more of the yellow. And so along the river's edge here, we're going to place some, a little more blue. That's a little too green. A little too dark. So we're in the distance, even though we're painting, some darker trees. Small, dark trees. I don't want to get too green, too bright yet. So I'm adding a lot of blue. More. And this way we sort of get a feeling that the river is continuing back there. We're lining the river with trees. Just leaving the river itself white. And the road's edge too. Narrow little marks. That's all I'm doing. Like this. And as they come closer to us, we're going to start to add little darker passages. Start to divide these fields. I'm going to work on the right side for the moment. Keep changing the composition of the green a little bit. Here I'm adding a little more brown, for example. And we're going to build in some fields. Some crops. Just by indicating those sorts of marks. More trees. We know, because most of us have been to cities that have rivers, is that trees like to form along the river's edge. So that we use them to indicate that in the painting. Just painting some orchard back here, right? Trees, rows of trees along the back. And I'm trying to be calligraphic. You know, that's something that I like in my work. So whether we're painting city scenes or countryside, brushwork is always important for me. And I prefer to see brushwork, even if it's a little inaccurate. So we're just adding some nuance at this point. We can get a little darker. As they come forward, the trees get somewhat darker. I don't have to show that. Sometimes it's along the shadowed side of the tree or the underside of the tree. Oh, this is so relaxing. I hear the sirens, but they really don't alarm me anymore. I've gotten so used to them. Right outside my studio. More. Fields. Here's that little house that we created. So tiny. Hardly visible. But let's stay with it. Let's put a few dark, almost like cypress trees around the property. We'll accent it that way. These little lines that I'm making are basically shadow shapes. Making the sunlight feel a little stronger as we get closer. And it creates depth. It helps to create that depth that we want. So I add this darker color while the paint is still wet. Let's add some shadows. Take a stronger dark, just using the tip of the brush. See how we trace it along the bottom of the mark we just made. And naturally the wet area pulls it up, softens it, and gives us a very natural feeling shadow, cast shadow. And you can see how that progression of darker greens and bigger shapes contributes to make the feeling of depth more, really fading to almost nothing back here, whereas through here we have bigger shapes, a few stronger darks. There's our little house. All right, let's use this dark also, since we're in a sort of darker color, to go under the bridge. You notice there's a shadow. I believe it's a shadow, or perhaps it's a shadow. Or some edging. Some detail work. Makes our bridge stand out a little bit. These rounded lines are where the bridge meets the water. If it's too dark, we can always adjust it. Right now it feels perhaps a little dark. Let's see how it dries. And let's paint the reflection, which is dark and warm. Just paint the reverse of this. Something like that. I want to keep some white here because it really makes it stand out nicely. Okay. Well, let's move to the left side. We're crossing the bridge, so to speak, moving over to the left side, the left bank. We start by mixing up more of that green. And I'm going to add just a little stronger touch. The base of this tree, create a little bit of shadow while the color is wet, same as we did on this side. Largely the light is overhead. Like that. And a little bit of this dry brush here and there. Not a lot. Let's continue. I'm not going to do much through here. I'm going to leave that sort of to the imagination. We have some nice fields over here, orchard. So I'm really letting the painting tell me where to make these marks. I'm not following too much what's in the photo. When I need some clarity, I look up at the photo and say, yes, that helps. Otherwise, I try to rely on what's already working in the painting. For me, this is a more natural strategy and easier to work with. And we add that same shadow color just at the bottom of our shapes. Give that feeling of overhead light. More blue back here. And then we just taper that off as we move back, adding more water, a little more blue, making our marks a little skinnier. Okay. Starting to have a finished quality to it. I'm going to add a few more brownish greens, mostly as shadows, especially down here. Returning to the center of interest to get a little more definition, a little more strength. Through the bridge. But it's looking pretty good. Sometimes I want to lighten an area, so I'll just take a little water, for example, come to the top of this tree, lift out a little bit, and then once it dries, I'll shape it again. I'm going to make it this just a little smoother transition down here, so I'm just adding water and kind of smoothing this out. I don't want it to be too active through here. Just subtle transitions, because this is the corner of the painting, and I don't want to bring too much attention to the corner. I want to push the eye up towards the center of interest, which is right through here, and feel that we kind of understand what's going on here, and then the eye should move around a little bit after that. I'm making this just a little clearer. I like that point where the shadows come behind the bridge and define the bridge as well. Like that. Maybe even a little bit on this side. No, doesn't need it. Okay, I'm at the mumble stage, so this is where I start to consider tying up the painting. I'm going to try to sort of blur this area with a little bit of blue. Big brush. Blur that corner just a little bit. I don't want it to be too outspoken. But I want it to push forward a little bit on this green foliage. Just a little bit. Soft in the back, relatively soft in the front. Some sharpness, some real definition through that mid area. everything from this point will be details. I'm going to add a few of those little stronger darks. Cobalt, burnt sienna. Just through my focal area, and I'm going to let that dry and see what it looks like before I add them elsewhere. There, some of that. Like a dream, isn't it?